Oh my gosh, what an enormous yikes. Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. Read, share, repeat, where we discuss books from the perspective of an aspiring fantasy author. Me, Carrie Share. And today I am taking another stab at doing gimmick-free book reviews. Of course, I have done variations of book reviews before, like through my reading vlogs or Behind the Bandwagon series, but it's actually been a while since I sat down and straight up gave my thoughts on a book without any sort of framework to guide me. And since this is ostensibly a channel about reading and discussing books, I think it's probably a huge oversight that I'm only ever giving my thoughts on books when I'm in the middle of them or through a specific lens. So to that end, I am making it a goal of mine to sit down and discuss at least one book a month that doesn't have any sort of pre-existing framework or gimmick attached. Just my pure unfiltered thoughts, be them positive or negative. And I'm starting out in April with A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows. A Strange and Stubborn Endurance is a queer romantasy about a young nobleman named Velison, who by consequence of being a third son, is named as part of an arranged marriage alliance with a noble daughter in the neighboring country of Tithina, with whom his home country of Rallia has had tension in the past. However, after it is discovered that Velison actually prefers the company of men, the envoy of Tithina agrees to alter the marriage contract so that Velison will instead marry his intended's brother. Unfortunately, such a marriage contract is not looked upon kindly by everyone, as Velison learns immediately upon arrival in Tithina, and he is thrust into the center of a political plot to destroy his marriage and potentially claim his life. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to pause here and give you guys a brief content warning specifically for sexual assault. The author does include a list of trigger warnings at the beginning of the book that includes the sexual assault as well as suicidal ideation and self-harm. However, because the sexual assault occurs so early in the book, it personally threw me off, and I think everyone should be aware that it does occur very early so that they have time to mentally prepare themselves. The sexual assault is on page and graphic and takes place in just the second chapter. So, with that in mind, please keep yourselves safe. Honestly, there is so much about A Strange and Stubborn Endurance that feels specifically tailored for me, and I'll admit right off the bat that I was getting 5-star feelings. The style of prose, low magic fantasy setting, the court intrigue plot elements, and arranged marriage trope are all ingredients I like separately in my fiction, and when you add them together, it's almost a guarantee that I'm going to have a good time. And then when you take into consideration the queer romantic subplot and the diverse cast, and I honestly did think that this was going to be my first 5-star read in something like 9 months. When you open A Strange and Stubborn Endurance, the first thing that jumps off the page, or at least it did to me, was the writing style. While I understand that the highly formal or even fancy style of prose that Meadows deploys in this book might be a little too much and certainly isn't for everyone, it is exactly up my alley. In fact, I wish I could download it directly into my brain so that I can one day emulate it in my own fantasy fiction. I love the vocabulary and the sometimes overly verbose style of sentences. I've got some examples for you. The Saints, it seemed, had a perverse sense of humor, but what else could be expected from a pageant of mortals elevated to a nebulous immortality by divine whim? Later, other large Rallian cities afforded similar opportunities, but none so ripe with intrigue as Farathel. And what else were indolent third sons good for but engaging in publicly spirited nonsense and privately tawdry affairs? And finally, in much the same way that my nerves had fixed on the marriage gathering as being more like a wedding than the vows we'd already sworn, apparently some inner Rallian instinct measured the validity of a marriage against the approval of dowagers, and all at once I was suffused with feelings I scarcely knew how to manage. I love that style of prose. I do. I love the long sentences and the big vocabulary and the overly formal method. I do. It's just for me. And I'm also a big fan of low magic fantasy settings. I'm the kind of reader that doesn't actually mind when a magic system doesn't come with rules that require pages upon pages upon pages of explanation, nor when magic plays a relatively minor role in the story. Two other books that gave me kind of similar vibes with regards to the magic were Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb and What the River Knows by Isabella Banez. And while yes, the magic plays a big part in both of those stories, it does kind of take a backseat to the characters and their arcs. And they are also both kind of nebulous in the rules and how it works, and is never really explained on page in depth. And that is true in A Strange and Stubborn Endurance as well. This is how it is described early on. Real magic was like an invisible muscle everyone was born with, but which only a few could use without proper training, just as only some people could wiggle their ears or curl their tongues as children. And with or without that native spark, you still had to work at it, and work hard, mastering charms before you could so much as attempt the more complex marriages of power, intent, and focus required for cantrips or spells, just as any man who aspires to lift boulders must first begin with stones. While our lead character Velison does have some magical ability, it is not something he thinks about often, and openly admits that he has been disinterested in honing his skill with any significant practice or study. And really, I don't mind that. I actually kind of prefer these stories where magic is part of the world, but not at the forefront of the plot necessarily. The magic is mostly just flavor. Speaking of the plot, though, there are two main prongs that drive the story along: the romance and the political intrigue that arises as a result of the union between Velison and Cathari, the son from Tithina, who is his betrothed, and by extension, their respective countries. And you guys know by now, I am not shy about admitting that romance and romantasy is not often to my taste. So it shouldn't be a surprise that the romance was the prong of the plot I was less interested in. The core intrigue, on the other hand, was perfectly up my alley. And for once, as the plot progressed, I found myself able to enjoy the mystery purely for what it was, rather than spend excessive mental energy as I was reading trying to figure out the culprit before the big reveal. That being said, I did not mind the romance itself. The queer aspect was a perspective I want to read more of and will be looking for going forward, rather than continuing to just bash my head against cookie-cutter male-female romantasy tropes. Now, I say all that, but the book wasn't perfect. Despite getting 5-star feelings during the first 10% or so, I became less and less confident in those feelings the longer I read. My feet are already asleep. My biggest issue came with Velison's character arc, which may not sound fair because so much of his characterization was wrapped up in dealing with the immediate aftermath and trauma of his sexual assault. But that's also kind of the point. 90% of his character in this book was trauma response, and it did get a little bit wearisome as the book progressed. By the end, I had come around to accepting that his journey of healing was sort of the point of his arc, and as such took center stage in his characterization. But the real problem was that when we do get to see facets of his personality that extend beyond his immediate reactions to his circumstances, he's kind of a douchebag. He's very nice to his best friend and is perfectly polite as a matter of course in the political scene, but apart from that, he's just kind of rude. I've got some examples of that as well. Do you have need of me, Tiern? Something about the question irked Kay, though he couldn't have said what. Isn't it possible that I'm just here to check on you? I don't know. Is it? Now, this moment is still very early on in the story, and to be fair, it precedes the event that shows Velison that Cathari can be trusted and does have his best interests at heart. But it still struck me as unnecessarily catty to someone who has been perfectly decent to him up until this point, to say nothing of the fact that these two are about to get married for political purposes, and being shitty to your intended husband, arranged marriage or otherwise, is probably not the best idea. But he's in a bad place mentally right now, so I sort of get it. But the fact that it stuck out to me as being noticeably hostile with respect to all of his other interactions, like I said, it just rubbed me wrong. Another example is with the captain of the guard, or someone high up in the ruling family personal guard, something like that. I can't remember exactly his role, but he's like a bodyguard, and he is heading up the investigation into the various attacks that have occurred. Figured a longer wait would make him more eager to talk, Tiern, and, well, I didn't want to borrow you from your husband if I could avoid it. Sure you didn't, Velison muttered, enough wry rancor in his tone that Reiki flushed. And again, I don't really understand where this comment comes from or why. It's just sort of douchey. And he doesn't behave this way with anyone else. Later, Velison is walking around the courtyard, eating off a plate when some plot stuff happens, and he is invited to go investigate, and he does this. We know where he lived, said Cathari. The guards haven't been inside yet. They reported back first. But we're going to head there now. Do you want to come? I thrust the plate at Reiki, who did an outraged double take while accepting it with a scowl. let's go. Which again, this is a man who's actively investigating the attempts on your life, and he's treating him like really disrespectfully, not just like as a servant, but like as a servant that he literally thinks is beneath him and scum. And I think that's kind of shitty, especially when you see him interacting with other servants and he's fine. So again, just like real douchebag behavior for no reason. And since we rarely get flashes of his personality that are not directly tied back to his trauma and healing, it sort of defines him as a person who's just sort of a douche. And unfortunately, he is partnered in the romance by Cathari, who is a perfectly lovely person who I thought was a really good egg, but has even less personality than Velison. He's a nice person who once fought a bear, and who doesn't want to be involved in politics. And that is literally the sum total of his character. I liked him, especially as I got tired of being in Vel's brooding ass head all the time, but Cathari kind of gave nothing, to be honest. So while I found the romance between the two compelling in a sort of abstract way, bear in mind, I love the arranged marriage / marriage of convenience trope, and when you add in the political strife that their marriage gave rise to, and the court intrigue surrounding their union, I love it. However, I can't really pick out anything about this couple specifically that I actually liked. They were just sort of fine. The same could be said for the culmination of the mystery at the center of the political prong of the plot. And here I'm going to give a slight spoiler warning for the climax of the book. I'm not going to go into any specific detail, but if you don't want any hints about the ending, I will put a watermark on the screen and you can skip ahead in the video until it disappears to avoid spoilers. Okay? 3, 2, 1, spoilers on. I said earlier that I actually allowed myself to not think too hard about the mystery this time instead of trying to solve it myself. And while I wasn't actively guessing at what the ending might be, I still found it to be kind of predictable. The ultimate culprit was hinted at very early on in the story, and no one really took the idea seriously. Yet Foz Meadows failed to produce any meaningful red herring to give us something else to latch onto. And therefore, that culprit, that suggestion of a suspect, stuck out in my mind from the beginning all the way through to the end. No other viable suspect emerged, and the main characters literally found out who was responsible by accident. They stumbled on it, literally. And then the fact that the motives of the villain were so dreadfully standard, it honestly kind of sucked a lot of the enjoyment I had been getting out of the court intrigue plot. And then you couple that with the fact that magic played such an integral part of the climax after being so entirely absent, apart from some minor healing magic here and there, for the first 500 pages. I was disappointed in the ending, especially since the main characters learned about the magical component before everyone else and then didn't mention it to anyone, which is such a blatantly obvious tactic on the author's part to write the ending they wanted rather than the one that made sense. And I kind of rolled my eyes at that. Okay, spoiler off. And there's also something to be said for the queer representation in this book and how Velison, as a gay man, repeatedly compares himself and his experiences to those of women, or specifically brides, in similar situations. Now, obviously, I have never been a gay man, but I have been a woman my whole life, and I can say that those sentences smacked of misogyny that was never even approached on page, much less corrected. I've got some examples of that too. My father sent me as he would a bride, and I never thought before what they must feel, all those women betrothed by their families. Later he says, I am, by my own sense of things, by virtue of having come to your house, to your lands, as a Raleighan bride would come. I cannot avoid the assumption, however flawed, that I am your wife, in the occupational sense, and that such duties I consider wifely are now my duties. And then even later he goes on to say, it's foolish, like I said when we talked about money and housekeeping, but some part of me keeps characterizing my role as that of a Raleighan bride. And brides, unlike husbands, are meant to come chaste to their marriage bed. Oh my gosh, what an enormous yikes. Despite all that, however, I overall still had a really good time with this book, and I would probably read 100 more like it if I could find them. This is my way of asking for recommendations if you have them. The writing style especially. You could have told me it was developed in a lab specifically to appeal to me, and I would absolutely believe it. And even though I gave the romance a hard time, this definitely ranks easily in the top 3 of most enjoyable romantasies I have ever read. Take that for what you will from a certified romantasy skeptic. Before I wrap up, I'll just run through my caw pile breakdown for you guys. For characters, I gave a 7. Velison was douchey, and Cathari was sweet but flat, but the ensemble as a whole was good. Atmosphere, I gave an 8. I love court intrigue, and I love the cross-border politics especially. Writing, I gave a 10, and in my notes, I just wrote, give me all of it in all caps. Plot, I also gave an 8. I enjoyed the vast majority of it, apart from the last 10 or 15%. Intrigue, I gave a 7, again because the ending was so weak. And logic, also a 7 for the same reasons. Lastly, for enjoyment, I gave an 8 because I really did have a good time reading this book. And when you put it all together, my score came out to 55, which when you do all the math equates to about a 4-star rating, which honestly does feel like an accurate representation of my experience with this book. So with that in mind, my final rating for A Strange and Stubborn Endurance by Foz Meadows, 4 stars. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I so appreciate it. If you like my content and want to support this channel, please like and subscribe or consider leaving a comment down below. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, please let me know in the comments if you found this review useful or interesting or entertaining. Like I said, this is the first time I've done a full scripted review like this that relied on direct quotations from the source material and wasn't just an off-the-cuff brain dump of my thoughts. And I'd love to know what you guys thought of it. In my next video, I will have a bookshelf reorganization vlog for you, my very first one. I hope you look forward to it, and I will see you then. Bye.